our recording. Arpad, did you want to start the intro?
Yep. First of all, let us greet you at all places, at all time zones you are into. This is our very first webinar session, and the intention of this webinar really, like we communicated, sharing knowledge. We know that it's kind of hard time currently due to the corona, and everybody is seeking for solutions. So we all advise to keep safe and stay home and enjoy family and take care about your team as well. And but we believe knowledge is an important issue, and so that's why we sat together with Mike and agreed on that every Tuesday, 9 a.m. GMT +1 time zone, we will schedule similar session addressing topics coming from your side, coming from the industry, coming from our experience, in order to go into details of these topics. And the today's topic, the very first we have chosen, is more like a common issue: how you measure personal competency, how you measure personal competency of your internal and external manpower. This question we are addressing to the hazardous area side. So we are not speaking about manufacturing, okay? We are speaking about operation of the hazardous area sites, and what kind of tools, what kind of good advice we can give you how to keep up with that very important question. Personal competency is about responsibility. Who can take the responsibility and how I can take it over from one side in order to have confidence that this is working well, and this is working well lifetime long. We prepared a short presentation for you. This presentation, we will share it with you at the end of the training within 1 day, okay? With all the questions, with all the recordings. So please feel free to ask. And once again, we hope you will like it. And then we can have you back again in 1 week time. So Mike, it's your turn.
Hello, everybody. So with this presentation, we are going into Ex Competencies from the point of design all the way to repair and rectification. So this map shows all the countries of the world which are full members or partial members of the IEC. From this, a lot of standardization has already happened, but within North America, there's their own set of standards. While Europe obviously follows the EN standards, but EN, IEC have obviously are near 95% similar. Africa is still developing with adoption of these standards, while Australia is on board fully 100%. Go to the next slide. So when we talk about EX competencies, who and how do you measure EX competency? And ultimately, who is responsible for this? Well, we define it as the thin red line. Once this point is passed, it now becomes the owner and operator or end user's responsibility for all of this. Now, while most of us in the industry have engineering experience during feed stage, so design and selection, or during construction, EX, QA/QC, commissioning, while others have the operations, maintenance experience, or even the repair, overhaul, and reclamation. Ultimately, all that happens during the concept, pre-feed, design, and everything done by the EPC, even including the commissioning. The EPC takes all responsibility for that. until the point of handover. At the point of handover, the end user accepts all responsibility. Now the question is, are there any issues within these other stages? Is the EPC driven by doing things right or being driven by money? Obviously, everything is driven by money. So we have to take into account that the end user is taking a lot of risks and responsibilities. Perhaps they're not always aware of these risks and responsibilities. Human-induced faults. If something is not an act of God, for lack of better terminology, it was caused by a human. So therefore, us humans, whenever these mistakes happen, we can mitigate them with systems and procedures, quality management systems, work procedures, Take 5s, GHAs, job hazard analysis. We've implemented these because we have statistical history of multiple issues happening, whatever industry. Just want to show an example of, people would assume that firefighters know how to fight fires. It's not always true. Slight. Just a little concussion. So an interesting point about that video, there were no procedures in place, and the competency of the firefighters was not sufficient for that of to deal with a dust atmosphere, a dust explosion. Another interesting fact, wet dust is actually more reactive and explosive. So when we talk about human-induced faults, when we measure people's competency, there are incidents which are not taken into account during their training, during their assessment. This is an example of a high voltage terminal box, which had multiple access points of water, not just through these obvious indicating points right here, but this is also in an area where there is 100% humidity. Now, water being in a gaseous or vaporous form, which then got in and got onto everything internally. The competency of the people indicated that a small little breather drain and a small decondensating pack would be enough. Obviously, in this instance, when we're dealing with high voltage, this is not sufficient. Another example, this is a light that has been selected, installed, and inspected. So the competencies at each of those points allowed this light. Now, this light, whether it be installed in the GCC, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Australia, the big issue is the ambient temperature. It's only good to 25 Celsius. So ambient conditions seem to have not have been taught, perhaps. to those potential candidates, those with existing EX competencies. Then there was also the question of the selection of this light. With a T1 rating, this light can get up to 450 degrees or greater. Why wouldn't an LED be chosen? That would be a better option, it would seem. Also, this light was North American rated, but not certified for ATEX or IECEx. So it's limited, its range is really limited to portions of the US and within Canada. This light has a significant potential for source of ignition. It gets very hot. So how do we measure EX competency and who is responsible? Well, each region of the world has different requirements. UK, they have COMA, different legislation. In Australia, there's others. To go through each and of them can be mind-blowing. So what other options is there? Well, as defined by 60079, dependent on which is chosen, whether it be UL, FM, IEC, EN, the owner-operator can deem a person to be competent via experience with proof by their circum vitae, the resume, or if they have a EX responsible person who is their supervisor, or the end user can define their own in-house competency scheme. Now, that could be by using any of these schemes below, or it can just be what they feel is sufficient. Ultimately, they are the owners of their facility. They make the choice. They define their choices based on a risk analysis. Other options within the industry include industry recognized training. So International Association of Drillers have them. There's nationally accredited schemes such as EHA for Australia. There's other ones such as the ISA, NEC. There's certificates of attainment, certificate of attendance. Each nation is different. Now, there are also internationally accredited schemes or methodologies which may be accepted within these nations or are voluntary and can be accepted around the world. But ultimately, it's a matter of regulations and what the end user chooses. So ultimately, it comes down to the end user choosing. So roles and responsibilities. Currently, we have roles breaking down into management, safety personnel, supervision, technicians, operators, maintainers, and designers. Now, within that, what about the other portions of management? At each, as we talked about the stages of design, we had pre-feed, feed, construction, commissioning, operations. Is that experience being spread across all these different activities, or is siloing going on? Is there walls between these departments? From our experiences, there are walls between these departments. Once a task is completed, it is pushed off to the others. So how can then this be solved? How can these walls be broken down? We'll talk about that in a moment. So once again, stages of plant life cycle. Why is there no EX department that goes across all these stages? But with that, why is EX not embedded with QA/QC and QA/QC embedded with EX? They're doing the same task. Really, they should be aware of both activities. Now, when it comes to commissioning, commissioning is a very interesting point just before handover. EX detailed inspections happen at mechanical completion. But from our experiences, during commissioning, many changes happen during that stage, right at that point. During that point, commissioning technicians can completely change an installation, can change the location, change an instrument. Have EX inspections taken place at that point? Do those commissioning technicians have the correct EX competencies? That is not always the case. So when we talk about the different solutions, one of them is IECEx COPC, which has units based on activities. Now, by basing it on your activities as to what you do, it provides adaptability to the industry's needs, whether it be gases or dusts, to the owner, operator, end user's needs. What do they need? It's not what the EPC needs, it's not what you need, it's what ultimately the end user. So these roles and responsibilities, you could have it somebody just doing preservation. You could have somebody that's just an installation technician, or somebody that just does testing. So using a multimeter, using an insulation resistance test. So there's greater quality assurance and control and asset management via segregated maintenance, inspection, and rectification teams. So there's the ability for impartiality. So if we were to compare the two big ones within the industry, that can be confusing. There's 10, 11 units for IECEx COPC. Well, CompEx, a lot of people know CompEx because it was the first in the industry. It's a company-driven scheme, while the IECEx COPC is driven by the standards. Now, what about dusts? What about these other CompEx units? Well, that's another 5 days, another 4 days. These can be perhaps more flexible within IECEx COPC.
And also a very important point, like non-electrical explosion protection. It's also not considered in many cases how to do non-electrical installation, machinery I'm talking about, in possible hazardous environment. That's something currently not really well addressed in any of the competency measurement tools.
Correct. Under CompEx, we have people learning to their CompEx handbook. Under IECEx COPC, you have people being taught to use the standards, how to find answers within the standards. There's no memory involved. It's teaching people how to think for themselves. Well, this is more of a memory exercise. There is benefits to both, and there is differences to both. Ultimately, it is for the end user to decide which they feel is sufficient.
And I do believe this is the main point what Mike just highlighted. This is the responsibility of the end user, which way to go or to go any of them. Okay, that's a very important question. We shall come back at the end of the presentation.
So, what's currently happening within the industry? Well, there's a new standard that is coming, whether it be IEC, BSIEC, or ENIEC, 60079-44, personal competence. It seems that they are removing competence from other standards and amalgamating it into one. Right now, the draft was already completed and it's gone to public comments. So we could be looking at approval within 1 to 2 year time frame. Would you say, Arpad?
Yeah, the plan is there's a working group, and the plan is to finalize this standard within 1 or 2 years. The main headache here again, that if in case of personal competency, everybody is speaking about electrical and no one is about non-electrical. So there is a demand on the market to define how we shall understand non-electrical explosion protection in terms of competency.
Very good. So, will this standard provide guidance to clarify, define, and assess the definition of competency across multiple regions and standards? There seems to be a drive to amalgamate between EN, IEC, and the North American and other regions such as Australia to clearly define words such as competency, which is not defined in any North American standard, by the way. The wording used by them is qualified, but qualifications does not mean one is competent. Competency is skills, knowledge, and experience. Qualifications indicate you have some knowledge. So this drive is to get standardization worldwide so that we can all communicate on the same level and reduce confusion. So when we talk about all the different stages of the complete EX lifecycle, will all the roles be considered? Now, when we showed you that EX Lite, did procurement, purchasing, design, did they perhaps make a mistake? What about management staff? Management of personnel and facilities? Do they not need to be EX competent if they're managing their staff? If they tell them to do something, they should know what they're potentially telling them to do incorrectly. Now, what about trainers and assessors? Is a CompEx trainer good enough to train under IECEx COPC? Is a COPC trainer good enough? Is an EHA, Australian version of competency, competent to do these things? What about your support staff, your administration? If they are gathering documents, creating an MDR, manufacturer's record book, do they know what they're working on? Also, operations and process technicians, they pay attention to functional safety. That device is working perfectly, that gas detector is working. But did they make any modifications to make it work functionally how they wanted? Did that maintain the EX safe operation of that item? If there was a gas release, yes, that gas detector may detect the gas, but was its EX protection technique nullified and potentially ignite that gas cloud? Once again, during commissioning, we went through that. A lot of changes can happen during commissioning. Their interest is on functional safety and accurate measurements. But perhaps EX is not thought of or an afterthought. Now, during front-end engineering and design, taking into account hazardous area classification needs to happen. Then the design happens after classification. But we've experienced many times in the industry where a wholehearted design or specification is copied and pasted from one project to the next. And then it's made to where the hack shall conform to the design. This can lead to issues. That is not the correct process. Then when we think of safety integrity level, when we talk about instruments such as safety instrument systems or fire and gas, so we're talking about plant integrity and personnel integrity systems. These systems need to be able to operate without failure out of millions of times of operation. Now, it may detect gas, that gas detector, but if it's outside of a hazardous area, doesn't that gas detector need to be rated EX if it's meant to operate in an uncontrolled release of gas? Now, out of all these roles and positions, what are their expected levels of competency? Will Will that be defined in the latest standard? I would hope so. How is impartiality achieved? How many times have we seen within industry where we inspect something and we repair it right then and there? Then when the inspection report comes out, usually what it says is, it doesn't say what the problem was. It says everything's okay because a worker, yeah, I did a good job, everything's okay. That's the mentality of people. But then we don't get true historical data. We cannot define what has been going wrong and to preemptively capture these issues and correct them before a uncontrolled event may happen. There are vessels where lighting has been filling up with water, and after 10 years, the company had to pay tens of millions of dollars, and were very surprised that they had to replace all the lights. Nobody had been telling them that they were filling full of water. The gentleman would just drain it. Now, will the assessment criteria be clearly defined to align with IEC ISO 17024, which has to do with measurement of the competencies of people? Now, this standard is not applied amongst all Ex Competency programs. IEC, EX, COPC it is. CompEx, yes. EHA in Australia, at this time, no. What will the weighting criteria be? What is the pass and fail percentages? From my own experiences, I know that in some countries, there are 70% failure rates by candidates, while in other ones, nobody fails. I feel that that is not just feel, but that is a disservice to everybody within the industry. And ultimately, the end user is the one that will deal with it. Now, how will everybody respond to this new standard? It's going to be interesting. Will notifying bodies, certifying bodies be able to adapt? Will people be ready for these new standards requirements to be able to get these new certifications? So I'm going to put out a poll right now, and it'd be wonderful if we could get your input on this question. Whom is responsible for EX competencies of a worker, whether they be internal or external worker? Now, this is a multiple choice question. If everybody can see on their presentation under polls, there we go. We got some people answering now. 12% have voted. If I could get all of you to put your answers in, that would be wonderful. But 41% complete, so we're just waiting for everybody else. We see that 71% of people say, 75%, responsible person of the end user company. Still changing, 65% voted, 71. Just need the last few.
71.
And about 71% have voted. So just the last few people, please. Give it another 10 seconds. If the rest could respond, 76. 1, 2. Okay, thank you for your responses. So I'm going to close this poll. Now, we see 31% say the worker themselves, 38% say their supervisor, 54% say the responsible person of their own company, while 69% say the responsible person of the end user company. Now, the correct answer, everyone. Now, if it was which would be the most correct answer, definitely the end user's responsible person. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Now, can EX
just Mike, before going to the next question, this question was also very important because dash 44 is addressing the in-house competency measurement. So it will give a tool, like Mike mentioned, to the end user being responsible for the competency. Because to be honest, like we know, like we are experienced about, all industry sites are different. Okay, so if you go from one another, you will find differences. Okay, that's important. That was a very good question, I do believe, and very good replies. Thanks for all.
On to the next question. How can EX competence and competency proven? What evidence is required? There we go. Launch that. Now, once again, another multiple choice question. Or, which is the most suitable, do you feel? If I could get each of you to answer, that would be wonderful. So it was based on the slide from before, could be based on experience, supervision, in-house competency system, a industry or nationally recognized program, or an internationally accredited certification scheme or methodology. 47% have voted. I think
certainly we shouldn't forget in-house competency system can be the two just following this topic, like industry and nationally recognized schemes or internationally accredited certification schemes. Okay, this can be selected as an in-house competency system.
72% have voted. I'll give it another 10 seconds. %, and closed. So we have 7% down as experience, proven via curriculum vitae. I'll make comment on that it is quite easy to pad a resume CV. You would need to probably test them. Now, supervision, in some countries, that's the only option. And if a supervisor is very good and communicates very well, it can be achieved. 21% said an industry or nationally recognized scheme. That can be a sufficient option and can be very good, depending on the industry, depending on the country. Not all are created equal. Now, an internationally accredited scheme, I think highly of this, but which ones? Is it based on a company's training information? Or is it based directly off the standards and teaching people how to use the standards? Ultimately, that's the end user to decide. 14% said in-house competency system. My personal preference, in-house competency systems can utilize an industry, national, or international scheme with proof of experience, with supervision, and in internal testing before people are hired. This is currently done within the North Sea. Before people are onboarded, not only do they do safety questions, they also do EX questions that are not found within a CompEx or IECEx COPC program. So it's a way for the end users to mitigate possible risks. They need to check the competencies before they hire somebody as part of their onboarding process. Okay. Next poll. which stage of an EX life cycle is most critical? So if we think about from beginning to end, we have classification, design and procurement, your initial installation and initial detail inspection, inspection and maintenance, or the one that kind of goes between all those, commissioning, operations. 17% voted. Give it another 30 seconds. 33, 39. 72, 78. 78 seems common. I'll give it another 5 seconds. Okay. 36% of your answers were classification, 14 for the next, 21, 14, 14. So it seems like after classification, it's very spread between everyone's thoughts and opinions. I believe it's important at each stage, but yes, if the classification is insufficient, or let's say dispersion, not many people understand dispersion of gases and vapors and liquids at different ambient temperatures, in different ambient conditions. If a specification or standard is wholly applied in a copy and paste method, something applied to the UK sure will not be sufficient within Australia or within UAE. You could be looking at black body UV temperature of 75 degrees Celsius. If a diesel tank gets up to that level, you're getting to the point where it is a hazardous atmosphere above that diesel. Vapors do start to become an issue. So very happy with seeing that 36% for the hazardous area classification, because if the items are designed to an insufficient classification, that then spreads on to each and every other process along the way. It becomes difficult for the inspectors, installers, and for during the operations of the facility, and the end user accepts all these responsibilities. If there is any existing issues, the end user receives it. But are they aware of what they've received? Usually ignorance plays a big part on this. There's no possible way for an end user to know everything. There's too much information, too many variables. Okay, next poll. What are some ideas that could improve our industry? Okay, polling is open for everybody. We could standardize and harmonize amongst different regions our understandings, roles and responsibilities, such as 44 is doing. We could define measures of responsibility for all roles. We could allow more access to standards. We could pass on our trade knowledge and lessons learned, which are rarely ever admitted to. If Chevron were to admit lessons learned from projects, certain stakeholders, such as shareholders, would tank their share price. They would lose money by being honest. So lessons learned are not always admitted or learned. Having been on many projects, they are lessons never learned but always repeated. Errors, the same errors, always repeated. But by repeating these errors, this is a disservice to all of us. These projects can go over budget, the end user can go out of business, and then we're all out of work. Another one is highlighting that EX safety is actually a greater level of safety. I'm sure all of you have ran into safety people that always talk about wear your gloves, follow procedures, but still perhaps walk around with a cell phone on the project. Or perhaps people don't have the correct anti-static clothing within a facility. These are potential sources of ignition. What about allowing vehicles inside the battery limits of an LNG plant? Is that not a potential source of ignition? So perhaps safety people are not the most safe. We are in the explosion safety industry. We're trying to actually not cause explosions, not just crushing of hands. So we had response, 65% people voted, 9% on standardization, 36% on defined measures of responsibility. Completely agree. 18% allow more readable access to standards. I agree. Spreading of trade knowledge and lessons learned. I think that should also be higher than 9%, but that's what we're doing right here, right now. This awareness. And highlighting that EX safety is a greater level of safety. That's always going to be a battle. We push for quality, and people always push for safety or production over quality. But with quality, we can get safety and production by being efficient. Okay, next poll. This will be the last one. What has the greatest success in EX competency outcomes? This is purely just your opinion. Would it be in-house customized solutions, which could include IECEx, COPC, EHA, CompEx, or other solutions? Or would it be IECEx, EHA, CompEx, perhaps other schemes that exist? %50 voted. For this one, I would suggest one answer. Choose your most ideal answer that you feel. But remember that in-house customized can include the other ones. 61%, give it another 20 seconds. It'd be good to get everybody's input on this. %61 voted. 67. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay. Interestingly, nobody chose the Australian certification method. Honestly, I can say I'm not surprised. CompEx at 8%. Company-driven scheme. Okay. Nicely spread between in-house, which could choose CompEx, or IEC, or any of the other ones, so that can be ambiguous. IECEx COPC at 33%, and different methodologies by an IECEx CB or NB, which an IECEx CB or NB can also use IECEx COPC, or they can have their own in-house customized scheme, which can be integrated with an end user. So actually those two answers of in-house customization and other methodologies, those can come together as one and utilize one of the other three of IECEx, EHA, CompEx. So it really is open. Let's go to the next slide.
Mike, one remark to this topic. I do believe it's very important. There are still countries all over the world where EX competency is regulated by the law, okay? And if this is the case, then this has to be followed. And this might be a unique one, a separate one, a dedicated one, Okay, so in each case, especially if we are speaking about international projects or projects on international level, the competency, even the competency shall be customized, okay, shall be locally adopted with national deviation, as we used to say. Okay,
Yes.
that's very important as well. So we shall make here a note that in all cases, local regulation shall be considered if there is any or if there isn't any.
So with this international standard that is coming, 44, there's hope that it will standardize and clarify all roles and responsibilities in sufficient detail where every region can define their regulations, and hopefully that one or two schemes or methodologies can be chosen, or the in-house option, so that we can all be communicating on the same level with the same terminology and avoiding communication errors. Hopefully using the same English words whenever we're speaking, because there are many different words. A bung is a plug, is a KO filler, plugging a hole in a box. Many different words for it, just causes confusion. So if we can standardize, use one standard for all of us to communicate with the same technical words, perhaps we can avoid any potential issues, any events. Okay. Within the industry, interesting thing is that 80% of our non-conformancies on a project during the installation and commissioning phase, I should say installation and mechanical completion phase, is glanding and terminations. Now, anybody with a lot of EX experience, not everybody will know this, but when dealing with a flame-proof enclosure, and actually most enclosures, you shall only have one adapter or reducer. You should also take into account dissimilar metals. This year we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and that's a barrier box. And then it also had a gland going into it. So you actually had 6 devices going into an EXD gas chromatograph, and different metals. Definitely not how to do it.
The topic is always, sorry to say, a topic is always very interesting, because to be honest, that's described in the standard, but nobody takes the time to read the standard, and nobody reads the time to read the manual of the manufacturer, where it's also highlighted, okay, highlighted as well. So that's a very interesting topic, what's currently shown on the picture.
Or people do know about the standard, but they don't have accessibility to the standards. IEC has many standards and then can be quite expensive. Within North America, you have one standard, let's say NEC 505. $100, you have the standards. Within North America, engineers are used less. The electrician follows APIRP, a recommended practice of how to apply a hazardous area for a petrol station, a gas station. So he knows how to do everything right. But does that copy-paste approach apply equally everywhere? What are the ambient conditions? Are the temperatures different? What about the wind? What about slopes of ground? What about the different types of fuels? Heavier than air, lighter than air, different additives. So when we look at glanding, I've come across many projects where mechanical personnel are the management. They don't understand that this is a mechanical device to ensure the electrical safety of the equipment and the cable. If it is not installed correctly, people can be electrocuted. It can cause a potential source of ignition. Water can get in. People say that IP ratings have nothing to do with hazardous areas. I disagree. Creepage and clearance distances, making sure that arcing and sparking won't happen is very important with each EX protection technique. When you get dust and water in there, any liquid, that causes a problem. Now, the other problem is that people will assume they buy a certain type of gland and they're wonderful. What about the cable? If the cable is of poor quality, this one here is bulging, there's no possibility to install the cable gland correctly. So these poor gentlemen and ladies will struggle every single time, and it is not their fault. But it's human nature for management to immediately blame the first person who touches these things, not the designer who chose it, or perhaps the specifications that called for these specific gland manufacturers and models, or called for those type of cables. These cable glands, we were looking at a 95% failure rate. So what we did is we defined a training program using memes, pictures, with words. The manufacturer's instructions, perhaps manufacturers are not competent in how to install their glands. Perhaps they're just manufacturing and selling things. It would be in their best interest.
Again, Mike, this again relates back to the topic in-house competency measurement, because right now the tool which we intend to show is just a good example how it can be done. But the topic here, it has to be done, okay? Because especially if there are people with the EX competency level, like the last assessment was back in 4 to 5 years, which normally the validity of any EX personal competency, people can easily forget the details, okay? And like you mentioned, the majority of the failures coming down to the glanding, okay? Which nobody is really taking care about because it's just a piece of the art. And if there is a $100,000 worth installation, the glanding itself is barely €5 or $5. Okay, so it's not something which people really pay attention.
Correct. It is an activity that really every different manufacturer or model you have, they should have training yearly on it. Unless they are using it all the time, it's very easy to forget. But I've run into many that say, I have this type of certificate, it's good for 5 years, I know what I'm doing. And then they cause cost and time delays for the EPC and then obviously the end user. So what can we do? Well, here's an example of too much complication. This would come in a bag. So people would install an O-ring and an IP washer. 100% failure, one would have to be removed. So the amount of man hours spent on reworks is maddening. So what we did in China, with 2 people that weren't even electricians, we set up an assembly line. Henry Ford came up with a great idea. It's quality assurance and quality control. Assurance, we had the procedures of how they do it. They have to make sure that it's warm in there. There's a temperature thermostat over there somewhere. One person prepares the cable. The other one put the barrier compound on the cable. The other one came back and inspected the other person's work. We came back hourly to hourly and checked the process. So through mentorship, we helped increase their competency. There was our own in-house competency program, and it was very successful. And this model has been repeated in Italy, Australia, China, Kazakhstan. Next slide. So, what can we expect for the outcomes of 60079-44 and from discussions like these? Well, the end user takes and accepts all responsibility, once again, from CSU handover, commissioning, and startup. So they believe that the validity of the classification, dispersion calculations, and the safety integrity levels, all those considerations are correct. The design and procurement of everything is correct. But as the commissioning operations and process technicians, have they maintained the EX-safe operation? Obviously, we have to consider regulations on the international, national, and local levels. We have to take into account all stakeholders, not just the shareholders, the community, the government, anybody that's around the facility. What about the reputation of the end user? Their reputation, let's look at Boeing. Their reputation because of outsourcing quality assurance, quality control. The quality went down, reputation went down. Their industry, now, before this current event, was gone down. So we have to think of the Ex Competency of everybody involved in the complete life cycle, all employees, contractors, and subcontractors. Now, what is the best approach to deal with this? Should we be conservative or aggressive? Reactive or proactive? My opinion, and from experience, proactive and more to the aggressive, mildly aggressive, but communicate, allay any fears. Now, should we only go to standards, which are minimums, or should we apply client specifications? But are they always clear, sufficient and clear, or are they copied and pasted between projects? Bechtel did 4 different LNG projects in Australia, and the specification was the same between each and every single one. Even with client considerations, they were 99% similar. Is that sufficient? Each client has different process, cascade process, whatnot for LNG, different ambient conditions, different workforces. So what's the best possible outcome? Harmonization, standardization to a higher level than our current minimums. Applying lessons learned and solid quality management systems with clear verification and validation. So verification, making sure that the controls are working, and validation that everything is working correctly, but also with impartiality. So ISO IEC 17024, not all national competency schemes apply to that international standard, which breaks down these impartialities and breaks down the importance of verification validation. But specifically this -44 standard that is coming, it's site and end user specific. So if Chevron deems that something shall be done, the likes of a Fluor, of a Bechtel, shall have to comply. So it's not going to be a grassroots movement. It's going to be the people at the end, they decide. They take all the risk and responsibility. So our own input is that we believe that a customized training to base level of standards, 60079, but always with awareness of all local considerations, trade knowledge, lessons learned. We want people to teach people to think for themselves, how to find information, never based off memory, and never to a singular company's methodology. When people only go by their memory or this one way only, they close down any thought, any being open to the possibility of doing things better, more efficient, save money, time, increase quality. makes yourself look good, makes your company look good, perhaps brings in more work. So, defined and measurable roles and responsibilities. I want to show this to show that competency is a major issue, and human nature, unfortunately, plays a big part. Important point here.
Here, Michael, let us move on. The video doesn't work. Maybe internet is too slow. Speed, I mean.
Okay. If anybody didn't see that, we'll share the video. Basically, there was a rush to get 20,000 people back to their homes to reduce the possibility of legal action. And at the end of the report, it was reported by the government, the local government, after getting everybody back, that there may be asbestos amongst their properties and on their lawns. So people, their long-term health was put at risk for a short-term goal of reducing the cost of putting people in hotels. So human emotions, unfortunately, pushing the wrong actions. So we want to say thank you from us at IndEx for this presentation. We are a group of companies that's under the XWorks platform. Under that, we are a group, that group of companies, we do complete EX lifecycle from classifications, design, product testing, and personal training and certifications and consultancy. We're always interested in others joining or having conversations with. So at this time, we would like to open up to Q&A. If anybody wishes to ask any questions, make any comments, please type it in the chat and I will repeat your question and we will respond to it.
A short summary, even from my side. The whole topic, EX competency. First of all, it shall be considered as further education. Okay, so not because of EX competency, you will be tough enough to do your job on site. And that's a further education. So if you're an electrician, you can do your electrician scope of work in possible hazardous environment. That's more like our intention to highlight and to make you pay attention to this. And again, whatever competency level is there on site, it shall be experienced, it shall be with experience, and this shall be measured. So we do believe that this kind of competency, the real knowledge, shall be measured before entering the site and shall be relevant to the site. You have seen the samples we have introduced here, I mean the demos and all the cases. there are certainly much more variables, many more variations available. And we do believe it makes sense to speak about, but certainly for a gas hazardous area, doesn't make the sense to speak about dust and vice versa, okay? So it needs to be dedicated, or if you only have flame-proof housings, then no need to be aware of pressurized cabinets. So again, the competency level shall be dedicated, shall be in one way overall, because you cannot send to different tasks different personnel, but once again it has to be measured. Okay, so this is a topic here. Just received a question. Can I ask if a CompEx certified professional and the IECEx COPC professional have the same skill set training in both cases, and if there is one preferred or other? First of all, technically, I would say there shouldn't be any difference. Both are related to the standards. Both are related to the IEC 60079 and all other relevant standards. Certainly, the methodologies they use is more different in terms of the training, but even the assessment and certification. Which is better or not, we shall not decide. It's not a marketing discussion. But I do believe the end user has to be in the situation. So in a way, the end user, the responsible person from the end user side, needs to be competent to decide which one to choose, which one to prefer.
There's a question. In the UK, CompEx has become so difficult to pass. I think what he means is on the refresher. Is there an alternative to this memory test examination? Now, I actually think that the end users, EPCs, shall implement a memory test during their onboarding procedures, but obviously it will be known that you are expecting that. But the end users need to mitigate their risks. They need to cover any legal risks to themselves. So that test is always needed. But I do not believe that a competency examination shall be based on memory. That is the whole point of competence, is skills, knowledge, and experience. But not everybody will have that going into the examination. So you need to build them up. So I don't believe that going by memory is the correct solution. Teaching them how to think efficiently, perhaps correctly, but where to find answers, and to give them access to those standards of how to find those answers. IECEx COPC, each certifying body is different, but some, actually the majority, the questions and the answers are copy and paste from the standards or from their website. So if you want to find a certificate, it's all online. Also, you're taught how to fill out an inspection test report. Obviously, nationally, each location is different. We have our own scheme, exam. We are trainers for that. It's in line with IECEx COPC. So customized solution would be best, but ultimately it depends on the end user. We have to be very clear. In Turkey, we do not have any penalty to end users that is given by the ministry if the end user doesn't have an EX inspection report, which is prepared by competent EX person.
Sorry for late. I just had another session.
Arpad, we can hear you. Sorry, 1 second. I will turn off his. Let me mute him. Sorry. Audience. Attendee. Staff. Okay, can you still all hear me? I hope. So within Turkey, the point is that not all countries have requirements to for further training formally with accreditation. They are mostly cheap laborers who do not mean, which does not mean they can't do the proper job. What do we think? Yeah, just because somebody doesn't have competency, the competence certificate, does not mean they are not competent. But it does help. It's further evidence. It provides a CV. I would not just go by it unless you're obviously in a certain country and you had no other options. But it's another case of providing evidence of your training and knowledge and experience. Such as an electrician, you have further training. Within Australia, we have new tickets for everything. High voltage, instrumentation, safety. You have all these certificates. It's become a game within the industry, a money-making scheme in many instances. But when it comes to EX, well, we're anti-explosion safety. So unfortunately, some countries don't have the regulations defined. But if they define that you follow the international standard, perhaps Dash 44 coming will define this much more clearly, and perhaps will make the local government action regulations, create the regulations. Another question came in. Some EPCs, like shipyards, vendors, they have their own workshops to train their workers for gland installation. The question is, does the industry have any way to certify such workshops for proper trainings? Well, yes, that actually does exist. You can include IECEx COPC as part of that in-house training from an external provider. Ourselves, we can come in and do that. Or under XWorks, we have the exam methodology, which is owned by EXNB, an ATEX notified body. They're approved to ISO 170, IEC ISO 17024 to certify anything that has to do with EX 60079 for competency. So gland training, yes, we could audit and bring them under the umbrella of the exam scheme. So yes, there is ways to certify. IECEx COPC route, it would be adding on the 000 or 001 unit, or under the exam scheme. Under CompEx, it would be much more difficult. The company has their own auditing processes and other requirements. Do we have any other further questions, or did anybody want to have any other highlights they would like to raise? We'll give it about 30 seconds. Okay, I think that is everybody. I want to thank you all for attending. We plan to make this a weekly event, and obviously in this times, for those that are free and available, at the end of this, there'll be questions going out asking for your input on what we spoke about, and also topics you would like us to cover. So gave a few suggestions, and the more people that give their feedback, the more advantageous to us all. So I want to thank everybody. And Arpad, do you have any parting words? Nope. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody, and hopefully see you in the future.